All right, we have Bryan Mann with us today. Thanks for joining us, Bryan, along with Jeff Moyer from DC Sports Training. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time. I know you guys are busy, and really excited to kind of talk to you about the stuff you've been doing.
Thank you.
Uh, well, we met actually. I had read some of your stuff quite a few months ago, and I was intrigued by it. Well, the initial reason was I think you had cited one of our books, and I was intrigued by that because I don't see that as much in the U.S. Of guys in the academic world
Right.
looking at our stuff and kind of using it as citations. So I was intrigued by that at first, and so I was really excited to hear you talk in Minnesota at the clinic there with Cal Dietz, and was impressed. I was excited to hear it, but I was even more happy afterwards. I was impressed. I really liked it. And Jeff can tell you, I don't sit through too many talks. I normally make it about 10 minutes, and then I'm like, let's go do something else. I'm getting bored. And that's just a fact. I don't have a good attention span. So I'll have to, actually, I can say this on the record. I think yours is the first talk I said all the way through.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I've ever sat all the way through another talk.
Well, I'm honored.
It ain't that big of a deal. It just tells you that my ADD is really bad. I'm not impressive, but your talk was. I liked it a lot because I understood it.
Thank you.
But I think what I liked about it was that you took something that's complicated, put it into something that I could understand, and then I could have taken it from there and gone and used it. To me, that's what has value, is I could use it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think that was what's important. So, having said that, explain to me how well, if you would, give us a quick, your background real quick, because I know we have some of the people that listen to our stuff that may not be familiar with you. What's your background?
Well, my background, I started in strength and conditioning actually in 1999 under a guy named Rick Perry. We were it was at Southwest Missouri State at the time, back in what I call the golden era of SMS. We went to, College World Series, women's basketball Final Four, had Ryan Howard, who's the first baseman for the Phillies, former All-Pro, Jackie Stiles, who was the all-time leading point scorer in Division I. So we were there in the heyday. I went and interned for Joe Kennett, Arizona State, Pat Ivy at Tulsa, back to Southwest Missouri. And then that next spring, Pat Ivy got the head job at University of Missouri, called me up, and I went there as a graduate assistant. Worked my way up into a full-time position. And I actually kept going to school after I got my master's finished. And in 2011, I completed my PhD. And in 2012, had some different opportunities pop up in the Department of Physical Therapy. Me, a meathead, being in the Department of Physical Therapy, they said,
Right.
We heard that you had some offers to go some other places. Why don't you give us 2 days and we'll have you a job here? And, well, this is where I'm at right now.
Here you are.
So I've got a dual role right now as Assistant Director of Strength and Conditioning and Assistant Professor of Physical Therapy here at the University of Missouri.
Wow. It's impressive. So when we got together there in May in Minnesota, you gave your talk on velocity-based training. What was the impetus for that with you? Were you sparked by something you had read, or was it something that was already kind of you were seeing other people do, or what moved that?
So how I got involved in velocity-based training actually goes all the way back to '99 with Rick. He had gotten all of those. He had graduate assistant, GA, whatever you want to call it, for Fred Roll at Kansas. So he had a huge knowledge base and huge library. Well, it seemed like it was huge at the time. And it was all these translated Soviet texts and super training. Essentially, those were the main books. So I started reading through there, and I found this stuff that had some velocities on it. I'm like, what the heck is this? And, the Roman's The Training and Management of the Weightlifter, Verkhoshansky's Fundamentals of Special Strength Training in Sport. And I think there was one other at the time, and I can't remember. And then in about 2000 or 2001, Louis Simmons had wrote an article in Powerlifting USA about the Tendo. Well, Rick and I had happened to decide that we were going to go hit Columbus for 2 or 3 days, hit Cleveland for a few days with Buddy Morris, and then come back. It might have been 2002, but it wasn't any later than that. And Lou had the Tendo there, and we started looking at it, and he was saying the applications that he found for football with it, or for powerlifting with it. And I remembered all the different velocities that I had seen for different derivatives of Olympic lifts and things like that. And at the time, the Fitcherdyne was only using average velocity, and it gave it in both metric and English units. So it still had its four little button things, but it was English and metric versus average and peak, which is what the Tendo has now. But you've got, you know, a lot of other things you can look at with different systems today. Well, I had taken that back with me. We had ordered a Tendo, and we used the stuff that Louis had talked about, and I had highlighted and made notes in my photocopies. Hopefully I don't get busted for this. In my photocopies of the translated Soviet text, and I had highlighted a lot of the velocities to begin with, just like, what is this?
Yeah.
And aggregated all of those different velocities and started going. And then in about 2000, and Rick and I, we only had one unit. We played around with it with some guys. It was more of a feedback tool. Then in like about 2006, on my doctoral work, I had to take a stats class, and I had just gotten I had gotten a full-time position here in Missouri, and I was traveling with the women's basketball team. And I knew that we had to do a 25-page mini thesis, and Jeff already heard this story. You may have too. I don't remember if I told this in Minnesota, but I'll go ahead and do it anyways because I like telling the story. I had to do this mini thesis for over the course of one semester on data that we cared about. So I decided that I was going to write it on how velocity or power, as expressed by a vertical jump, was related to the Olympic lifts, because the Olympic lifts are fast. They're supposed to be explosive. So they're going to be what we use to develop explosive strength, which is, you know, done with a vertical jump, which I calculated into power using the Sayers equation. So the whole semester, and Joseph and Jeff, this is the first time that I did not procrastinate in my academic career at all. I've always put everything off to the last possible second. I was so proud of myself. So I wrote the full 25-page paper, and I waited until we learned the specific stat, which was a backward stepwise logistic regression, I believe. And we learned the stat, and that night, you know, it's October, November at that time. I don't want to forget how to do it. I understood it clearly at that point, so I went straight over to the stats lab, and I put in my data, and I ran the stats, and I figured I got something wrong. So I called up a friend of mine who was way smarter than me, and she came over. You know, she got out of bed and came over to the stats lab and helped me do it that night. And she found the same thing, so obviously she wasn't as smart as I thought she was. You know, we found no relationship between the Olympic lifts and vertical jump. There was one between, it was body composition, improvement of body composition, and increase in squat is what we found. So then I take it to Dr. Osterlin, and this guy's got degrees from Stanford, Princeton, and Yale. All right, we're talking, he looks like Beaker, and he is smarter than hell. Brilliant man. And he, you know, sits down with me and he looks through everything, makes sure it's all coded right. And then he looks at the output and he says, well, it looks like that you ran it right, but let's see just in case. And he runs it and he's like, yeah, this is exactly what it is. This is not what you expected. And I was completely flabbergasted because, you know, my mind was just blown. We've been doing Olympic lifts because they improve explosive strength. So then I was pissed because I had to go rewrite my paper. You know?
Right.
And then I've got to bring this information to Pat, to Coach Ivy. And I bring it to him, and, you know, he's, you know, long story short, we go back and forth for a minute. I'm like, hey, how do we measure explosive strength? He said, vertical jump. Okay. How do we train explosive strength? The hang clean. And I'm like, well, so we're saying that the clean and the vertical jump should be related. And he's like, yeah, he's gotten real short. I know it was one of those days that, you know, you shouldn't ask anybody, but I was getting ready to go on a road trip, but I didn't want to forget.
Right.
And he's like, why are you asking me so many stupid questions? Yes, of course, that's why we do cleans, to improve vertical jump. Like, well, what if I told you that it wasn't related? He goes, I tell you, you're stupid. Well, I've got the data. Well, you did the data wrong. Well, Dr. O ran the data. Oh, so we had to step back and think and examine everything more deeply. And that's whenever we saw that we got some tendos in and our guys were moving the bar at 0.6 meters per second, and I knew good and damn well on a mean velocity. And I knew good and damn well that it needed to be at least 1.5 and higher for those guys. And it wasn't. So, you know, we were looking back at that SAID principle, that specific adaptations to impose demands. We were imposing the demand of absolute strength. and expecting the specific adaptation of explosive strength. We were kind of wishing in one hand and pooping in the other and see which one filled up first. So that's, at that point, that was really the jumping off point. At that, we got several Tendo units, and we started looking at the velocities that our guys were moving. And then a year or two later, we reran the data, and we found that the clean did become it did play part in the regression equation. It did become a significant contributor, but it was still third. Our number one was body composition. Our number two was improvement in squat strength, and improvement in clean was number three. So I haven't reran the data since then to kind of look and see how that's changed over the years. But I'm going to guess it really hasn't changed much as far as the contribution goes.
So when you kind of saw that, was your mind blown? Like, wow.
It was blown. It was like, this is why we do Olympic lifts, and this isn't what's going on.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like if somebody sold you a Rolex, and then all of a sudden you see that it says Rolex on it.
Right.
It's completely flabbergasted.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've spent all this time doing this for that? Holy cow. And there was nothing. But, I was completely flabbergasted.
It's interesting that you bring it up, and it kind of ties in with some of the stuff that we published. I know, like in transfer training, Dr. Bondarchuk's kind of talked about, look, these maximal lifts, whether they be Olympic or otherwise, don't translate into success at certain points. There's a break-even point where it's not even more beneficial. It actually could be a negative.
Right.
And Dr. Yessis has said this for many years, and I have the opposite background that you have. I have the totally non-academic, came in by luck, 20 years ago, met Dr. Yessis, and then got introduced to the Russian stuff, and I hadn't even met anybody in the American side, probably for the first almost 10 years, maybe 8 years. I didn't know anybody. All I knew were the Russian stuff, what I was reading and what I was learning on. And I remember asking him, I said, because he had written it in one of his books that I ended up publishing. He said, the Olympic weightlifters are real explosive. And he's like, yeah, he said, but the problem is that people don't realize what Olympic weightlifters do to train. He said, they don't just do the Olympic lift.
Right.
He said they're doing, plyos and other explosive, not necessarily just maximal lifts. And furthermore, there's an upper limit to how explosive they are. Once you get them up to a certain level, the guy that's, clean and jerking this, he gets up here, he doesn't get any more explosive in terms of jumping higher, necessarily. It'll flatten out at some point. And so, if you would talk about that, were you guys seeing in terms of improvement? Because me not being an academic, all I can look at are the results. Right. So I can't go, well, I don't know if I agree with that theory because I don't have the education to debate. But were you seeing look, from junior to senior year, these guys aren't getting any better?
Absolutely. And that's actually been found in two studies, one by Jacobson and one by, I believe Kraus was the lead author on the other one, that looked at the longitudinal changes over a career in Division I football, where they examine their guys over 4 to 5 years and see how they change. Well, their freshman to sophomore year, they're seeing huge improvements in vertical jump and speed. And then after that, their sophomore to junior year, they were seeing huge increases in strength, but the improvements in speed and power were negligible at that point. And I think that has to go back to, go all the way back to Bompa, right? And the orange-covered book, the Theories and Methodologies of Cognition, which I believe is currently out of print. Yeah. He was talking in that book about how all strengths, no matter, are related back to absolute strength. And I believe that occurs for a while, and that's what they're seeing at that freshman year. And that's what we saw at first, too, is that our freshmen and sophomores, they improved, but our juniors and seniors did not. And that goes back to Buddy Morris always talked about that 3 years, that linear periodization worked fantastically for 3 years, getting strong work for 3 years. After that, you could get as strong as you wanted, but there weren't major improvements in speed and power. And what translates better to sport than speed and power, excluding possibly with the offensive and defensive linemen or a rugby scrum where they're already locked up, and then maximal strength, of course, will play a huge role in that. But yeah, no, that's exactly what we saw. And then whenever we started working on the special strengths, the strength speed and the speed strength, improving that rate of force development, then our vertical jump started going up. 40s continue to go down. Right now, I'm working on something with Jerry Mayhew and Bill Breshew. I get the idea is they know how to write the stuff up and they know how to run the stats. So we're looking at to see it's smallest worthwhile change. We're looking at that for the 40 and the 10. To see what it actually makes a significant change. Is it 0.01? Well, nobody knows. So we're going to see if that, while we did continue to improve in the speed as well, was it actually a significant change? And then hopefully we'll get the data analyzed, because I've got 15 years worth of stuff here. Our data goes all the way back to 2000. So then you want to talk about looking at things longitudinally and long-term changes. I don't think anybody else has got that data around here. In this country at least. Yeah. You get the way Division I football works, the average coach is in one place for like 2.3 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is an anomaly, so we might as well utilize this data to see what causes the changes. And granted, that's going to be a misnomer, because what causes the changes in our system. So we could take it over to Tom Cross and Whitney Rod and Mid-American Nazarene, and their data could be completely different. But, that's what worked for us.
What do you find being the, I guess, where did you guys land as far as what percentages did you need to be at? What corresponded with developing, maximal speed or power? What ranges do you find yourself in with the guys that you train?
Man, you know what? This is actually, to me, this is extremely interesting. I've said it for a while, and I just was watching a video with Buddy Morris from that sports performance seminar thing that they did in February, and he was saying, you got to find the common denominators. Well, that's something that I've been looking for a long time. And it's funny that the stuff by Bosco and his strength continuum works out perfectly. Okay, so you've got that 0 to 15% is non-quantifiable, that you can't change it, right? It's the hand of God. It's blessed by the hand of God. That 20 to 40 was starting strength, 40 to 60 was non-quantifiable, 60 to 80 was accelerative, 80 to 100 was absolute strength. Well, let's go back down to that non-quantifiable, and we're seeing that, and you can bring Lou back into the system too here, that 30 to 50 and 40 to 60-ish percent for speed strength and strength speed. Well, let's break it down by velocities. And you have a very, very clear delineation. It just separates out perfectly. And that, was corroborated by Jandaka, Roman, and Verkoshansky looking at strength speed and speed strength, where we've got 0.75 to 1.0 meters per second as strength speed. And you're really looking at that 60 to 40 to 65, 70%. Okay, about 65%. 70% for some of the guys that are high type 1. High type 2 fiber. And then we're looking at that 30 to 50% for speed strength. And that's a 1.1 to 1.3 meters per second. And those are all average velocities and on the traditional squat, bench, deadlift type stuff. And there's a little bit of variation that exists within those velocities for the upper body and lower body because of amplitude of motion. But that's really what we're looking at, man. Is that the stuff from Carmelo Bosco, that it holds true today. It's just that the velocity allows you to know where you're at for that given moment rather than where you would be at compared to your previously tested 1RM 6, 12, 18, 20 weeks ago and the other stressors that are involved.
Right. Because it all could depend on the day.
Absolutely.
Just, like any lifter knows, you go on one day, it feels like nothing. Next day, feels like the weight of the world on you, whatever that may be. And then correspondingly, I would imagine, since you guys have collected a lot of data, that you see that correspond to your day-to-day workouts with your guys, that you're seeing good variations within the same week.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, with that being said, do you guys follow a particular strategy in terms of, okay, we're back in January, we're just getting started, we're working our way down now? From what I remember you saying was that you guys kind of worked on strength in the winter, you got into the summer, and then you kind of went with this velocity based stuff, correct?
Yeah, so it's we are definite absolute strength earlier on in the off season, and then we'll start transitioning to more and more stuff in the summer, the preseason, looking at more strength speed and speed strength stuff as we go into power and those sorts of things. Because whenever you get down to it, it's nice to have the feedback of velocity for absolute strength or hypertrophy, but it's really irrelevant. Did you lift the weight or not?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at with the absolute strength stuff. And then the hypertrophy, it's all related to time under tension anyways. It doesn't matter if I go slow eccentric, slow concentric, or I get a lot of reps in. It's just about the time under tension.
Yeah, right. Do you guys have a progression in that way? Like, do you start at one percentage and move towards another one the closer you get to the season, or is it kind of mixed into the same bag? How does that work for you guys?
So, are you talking about like the progression of the load then?
Yeah, so like if you guys are in June, wherever it is, you're getting ready for the season. Are you in 60% for some time, saying, "Hey, we're looking a little bit more on that end now for speed, maybe closer to the off season"? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. Go down a little bit in the percentage, kind of getting closer to camp.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen, and then it's just going from a slower velocity to a higher velocity.
Okay.
There's actually stuff that's coming out right now that's giving us, and Jeff was there to see it at CVASPs, that you can actually completely replace your percentages with velocities on certain movements right now. The bench press, they found an R squared equals 0.98, which means 98% of the people fell within plus or minus 0.04 of these velocities as they related to percentage zones. So yeah, you can just straight up say, okay, normally I'm working on power here, and I'm normally up at about 65%. Well, then I'm going to be doing it at what would that be? About 0.75 meters per second. And then work my way down to, 40%. I'm moving the bar about 1.0 meters per second. So you can just straight up replace that stuff. You don't have to go reinvent the wheel. You just take the percentages, switch it out with the velocity, and you're golden.
So you kind of know, based on the measurements that you guys have already made, you can kind of just designate percentages to it.
Yeah, it's definitely getting to that point, and that's pretty fresh within the last year.
And that's kind of, and it's fair, and it's very reliable. And the reason why I ask is, like, I talked to Dr. Bondarchuk, and he's within a range of percentages. He just assigns them. He's like, look, I want you to do this at this percentage, that at that percentage, whatever the case may be. And Hank Krijnhoff, sprint coach, from the Netherlands, we're going to be publishing a book of his in the next month or so on sprinting speed. And same idea. He said, yeah, we might be up around 60 something and then come down a little bit right before they run.
Right.
A little bit faster. And once again, it depends, with a track athlete who maybe throws a little heavier implement. That was the thing that was of interest to me. A hammer thrower or a shot person throwing a little bit heavier implement, a baseball player, he's only throwing a 4-ounce implement as opposed to 9 kilograms. So you have a different, kind of idea there, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting. Was interesting to me was to see, depending on the athlete, depending on what the sport is. You guys are mainly, dealing with football, but
right.
You could look at that from other perspectives with other sports, I'm assuming, and you would,
absolutely,
like, if the baseball coach came to you, you would tell him, well, yeah, you might want to be up in here and 60%, as a batter maybe, but as a thrower, pitcher, maybe he's going to want to come down here a little bit too, lower percentages.
Right. Yeah.
For velocity.
Starting strength or whatever there, because they're just rapidly overcoming inertia from a standstill. Yeah, you just got to look at the sport and see the demands of the sport. So, interesting project that we're working on writing up right now, which reminds me, I was supposed to get that done last week, was have you ever seen a Mad Max thing? It's kind of like a stationary tackling dummy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so what we did was the guys down in the lab, I'm very, very fortunate here. We've got a bioengineer right next door, okay? And he took an accelerometer and he stuck it on the back of the Mad Max. And we took a gym aware and we hooked it up to the athlete. So we saw that the speed and force of the impact and the power of the impact from the Mad Max itself and the speed of the athlete moving into the Mad Max. So this is a fully closed skill, controlled environment. Yeah, is it going to be completely transferable over? Well, absolutely not, because guess what? The Mad Max isn't going to hit back. So, to say that it's completely related to football, that's a little misnomer. But what we found was that basically the guys were coming out. I don't have the data in front of me right now, but they were coming out at about an average of 1.5 meters per second, which whenever you look at the distance, that's speed strength, because that's more like the Olympic lift distance. Yeah. That's just like a hair below a snatch. And then once they made contact, everything slowed down. And he looked at some stuff with the camera and was like, okay, well, after they made contact and like one of the person is dominating the other, they're moving at about 0.7 meters per 0.5 meters per second. Well, what is that? Well, that's right there at that accelerative strength. I think it was 0.6 meters per second. And then if it's a standstill, they're moving slower. What is that? Well, that's absolute strength, when they're moving at like 0.3 meters per second, or they're not moving. So we can look at that one position, the offensive lineman, and we can see how fast that, the different things that are required for it. Well, let's look at the receiver. Whenever they get off the line, what are they doing? They're moving at an ultra high velocity. Typically, unless they're on a jam coverage, the D-back is going to let them go and they're going to follow them. So they go from accelerated strength to just starting strength, rapidly overcoming inertia, as Bondarchuk mentioned, and that was an Olympian size and strength manual.
Probably.
And then they're going into just absolute speed. So, how necessary is the absolute strength for them? Well, it's necessary enough to increase the other traits, but it's not really more necessary than that. However, the offensive and defensive linemen, they're always going to need to have this high absolute strength reserve, because they're going to have to call upon that to be able to whip their opponent's ass.
Yeah, yeah. And I would assume, like with the linemen, a certain degree of isometric strength, actually, with different joint angles.
Right.
As they're kind of fighting with a guy, there's a couple of different factors involved there that wouldn't, like you said, wouldn't be involved so much with a wide receiver.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure there would. That's something I've never looked at, and the reason being, we don't test isometrics. So, to be able to throw something different into the mix, that's pretty tough to do.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I didn't realize that it was more unusual until, like I said, I had met people in the United States, because it was kind of part of what we did. It wasn't like the critical piece, but like with certain things, certain sports, certain exercises, we would use an isometric, movement maybe. And you'd see Bereshansky mention it, Bondarchuk would mention it, some other guys would mention it. The importance of isometrics in different situations.
Yeah.
And because I had only learned in a practical setting, all I knew was, this is what we do. I don't know any of the whys, what fors. You know what I mean? I'm just doing what I'm told. And then later, as I started helping younger coaches, and from the practical point of view, then I realized, oh, it's different. I don't see anybody doing that, and I never realized it until probably in the last 5 to 7 years, where I realized that other people weren't using them. Because like I said, there's certain situations, the lineman, he's holding this guy, that's his job.
Right.
Obviously that's an isometric, contraction that could be developed. Now, as I said, I like to stay as practical as I can. So with the way you guys do stuff, give me some sets and rep and rest period kind of setup. What do you see on a day? If you're going into squat, what's it going to look like?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to develop that day. So let's say that we're looking at trying to improve strength speed. Okay, then we're looking at 8 sets of 3 on a bench press, probably 9 sets of 3 at around between 0.75 and 1.0. If we're trying to look more on the power end, we're going to go faster up. If we're looking more on the strength end, we're going to be closer to the bottom. So let's say if I wanted to move it, I planned on doing it at 60% that day, 8x3 at 60%. I'm moving at 0.75, 0.8 meters per second. If I wanted to do 8 sets of 3 at 40%, I'm moving up closer to that 1.0 meters per second. And a lot of the things that I do, like the sets and reps wise that I've done with soccer, is I still use a lot of the sets and stuff and intensities from Weightlifting Fitness for All Sports by Ayaan and Baroga. You know, why reinvent the wheel, man? They had some great stuff. So I'm just going to be rolling with that. So again, it goes back to that common denominator, right? So we found they rolled up stuff that worked great for strength speed. I'm using Bosco's intensities that work for the percentage of 1RMs that work for strength speed. And it happens to be that the research from Gonzalez Badillo found that these are the exact velocities that correspond to these percentage of 1RMs that work in with strength speed. So it's just throwing everything in together, right? And I've just been so super fortunate that the research has proven, and the stuff that I haven't even done has proven me right over the past several years. And it's been, man, validating. You know, all the people telling me I'm crazy. Well, you know what? They're right. I am crazy. Who goes and does some of the stupid stuff I've done in my life? But, I might be crazy, but I'm still right.
Well, and I think I think that was the thing that kind of interested me when I heard you talk. Was I picked up on the focus on just knowing what would work.
Right. Yeah, that's all that matters. If it doesn't work, I ain't doing that again.
Right.
Like Olympic lifts without the velocities, man. Screw that. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, and that's where I've seen this be the case. And I guess I can be more critical because it doesn't really matter. I don't work anywhere. So, but a lot of the coaches in the United States, like, they spend more time defending what they're doing than critiquing it. And I've always tell guys, look, critique what you're doing because you're not going to get better defending it.
No.
Actually, you could get worse, but you definitely can't get better.
Absolutely.
If you're critiquing it, at least you can move in the right direction of getting better. And I think that, you know, I've had this conversation. I had a couple of debates with guys that were well known. I got suckered into a radio show. I don't think they did it on purpose, but guy was, you know, he's, oh, you know, more strength is always better. Doesn't matter. You know, it's always going to make a better athlete. And I'm like, well, no, it's not. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. It's not. Because if it was, powerlifters would dominate every sport. You don't need to be a genius to know anything. Just take a 1,200-pound squatter. I can guarantee you right now the guy can't move.
Yeah, I've squatted 1,000 and I can't move. So.
Right, exactly. So I know right away, you know, you don't need to be a genius. A layperson can figure that out. Strength does not equate into better. It does to a point.
Right.
But then it stops.
Yeah.
Then it stops. And so, you know, I see a lot of people, it's almost become, in my opinion, it's become, because they're ignoring common sense, you have to start saying, well, we've kind of like ignored just what's obvious. You know what I mean? The strongest guy on the team is never the best player.
No.
I've never seen that be the case ever. Every now and then.
Yeah.
And that was because he was a genetic freak.
Oh, God, yeah.
And he was already strong and already fast. He was already everything. He won the genetic lottery.
Yeah.
But he was not good because, you know, of being stronger than everybody else.
Yeah, and you know, it goes back to correlation does not imply causation.
Yeah.
I hear all the time people say that, well, you've got to do Olympic lifts because the Olympic lifters are the most explosive and fastest people in the world. Well, are they the fastest and most explosive because they're Olympic lifters, or are they good Olympic lifters because they're fastest and explosive?
Yeah.
So let's look at the training and let's realize that, you know, let's see what happens as a result of the training.
Yeah.
It's not just, you know, say, I gotta stop there for a second. Sometimes I start getting on a
rant. No, that's fine. We had Buddy on last week, and he ranted for like 90 minutes straight, but it was fun.
Yeah, you know, and dropping F-bombs as a professor usually isn't the...
It's frowned upon. That's why Buddy's not a professor, probably.
F-bombs are frowned upon. So, it's just like, it's one of those things that I always say, don't piss on my neck and tell me it's raining.
Yeah.
It's not, correlation does not imply causation.
Yeah.
I don't want to see this stuff.
Yeah.
Show me what happened as a result of the training program. Great, your most explosive guys were your most explosive guys. No shit.
Yeah.
Let's look at what happened as a result of training.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, exactly. And it's funny that you say it because it kind of goes back to what I said before. Doc just said, you know, people aren't asking what Olympic weightlifters were doing to train.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, if they're world-class Olympic weightlifter, they're genetically gifted. You don't get up to the world-class level by training alone.
No, and what are they usually? They're usually short and squat.
Yeah, right. And
No?
got a very high percentage of fast twitch fibers to begin with. And so you got those factors playing into it, and kind of like what you said, there's it doesn't mean anything. That it really means nothing, because once again, you can't take an Olympic weightlifter and get him to go play football.
Right? No, you can't.
He might be phenomenal in the 10-yard, but he can't guard anybody. He couldn't, he couldn't change directions. I mean, there's so much more,
absolutely,
to the picture than that. And I think that is probably one of the bigger flaws. And the funny thing is, and I thought about this while you were talking, Bryan, Dr. Yes is actually the one that introduced that to the whole United States, the whole idea that Olympic weightlifters were more explosive than everybody. Because, he did in the Soviet Sports Review, the first year was 1964.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got actually every one of them.
Do you? Yeah. Okay. And I'm if I'm not mistaken, he's the one that because he's introduced almost all this. Nobody would know about any of this stuff if it wasn't for him, because
absolutely,
he was the guy that introduced it. But the Olympic weightlifter, that whole thing, that was his, he's the one that mentioned it. But he's like, but people took that and ran with it. They didn't realize there was more to the story than that.
Right.
I was just trying to make an example.
Yeah.
Like, okay, look, see this, He said, I'm just saying that kind of training develops explosive athletes, not that that's the way you got to, that's
right.
The plan.
Only thing to do. Yeah.
Exactly. So now when you guys are using 8 sets of 3, now if you go down to lower percentages, will you be using a little higher reps, same sets, or a little less sets?
We can. It's, we don't get real super fancy, because whenever we get down to it, we're dealing with beginning to intermediate level strength trainers.
Yeah.
We have advanced level strength trainers, because this is GPP for them. This is not their sport. So we really try and keep everything super simple. I mean, we might do 8 sets of 3 down to 6 sets of 2. Okay, that's about the biggest variation.
Biggest variation. Okay.
We'll hit 0.75 for 6 sets of 2 and 1.0 for 8 sets of 3, and we might have a variation like that. But that's really the most that we go. We'll keep everything pretty consistent, because they don't need the variation to adapt to.
Yeah.
They're getting enough variation on the field.
Yeah.
To react to different what their different teammates are doing, and how they have to to spend time worrying about improving their sporting ability, or learning the playbook, and all these other things. They're intermediate. They're not advanced level weightlifters, and that's been my biggest mistake.
Yeah.
Over the course of my career, is I get way too advanced. Well, why did I get way too advanced? It was more for me. I got bored. I wanted something fun.
Right.
They didn't need that. And anytime I try to get too advanced with them, what happened? We got no results, man.
Yeah. You're preaching to the choir. This is one of the biggest things that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Because guys will call me, and I get calls and emails about some of our books. And they'll say, well, I'm trying to implement such and such that I read in one of your books. I'm like, well, number one, you're not dealing with, you realize they didn't write for anyone except for high-level athletes. There's no such thing.
Right.
There's no articles that Bereshansky wrote for a low-level athlete. None. No books, no nothing. None of these guys did.
Yeah.
They didn't work with low-level athletes.
No.
And besides that, the edge of science was the high-level guy. They already figured you knew what to do with the low-level guy. You know what I mean? And this has been one of the biggest misconceptions there is, Bryan, is that with our books, people are trying to apply it to a high school or an 18-year-old college kid. Stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Why? Because, and Bondarchuk said this too. He said, look, you're giving them something more advanced. He said, not only does it not work, he said, you actually ruin them for the future. He said, because you've made imprints in their nervous system that you can't take back.
I have been noticing that for years, man, that anytime I threw something that was too advanced at them, they would never get even back to the previous level.
Yeah.
And I did that a lot. I did a lot of experiments with my women's soccer team, because if you mess up women's soccer, I mean,
nobody's mad.
Nobody's mad, and the coaches usually don't even notice, because he doesn't look at the results. So God, he doesn't. I don't have women's soccer anymore, so I can.
So you can say it, right? Yeah, right. You can't get fired.
Yeah, but and I love those kids. I always want to do the best for them, and so then I was making some pushes on things, and sometimes I would see this huge increase and that would last for about 2 weeks, and then they would reverse, and they would never even get back up to the previous level.
Yeah.
And it was just that got their system revolted against me. It was like, okay, we're going to do this. Here's a quick super compensation for you, but then here's the middle finger, and we're not going to ever come back to that.
It's a double one, double middle finger salute. I've said that. We've talked about this all the time. I said, look, I said when you can't get out of bed the next morning, that's your body's way of saying, hey, stupid. We'd like it if you'd relax over there. We're trying to give you a hint.
Right.
But if you'd like, we can make it hurt worse. You know, if you want to keep going, you know, and we can make the athlete worse. I mean, this is one of the things that's pandemic, in my opinion, in college sports. You watch the kids, they go there, they get worse.
Yeah.
Because they're being worked so hard.
Right.
They're working them into the ground. They're applying stuff that's not meant for them. And I'll share this with you because I think you could appreciate this. One of the guys over at University of Minnesota, Shea Thompson, had asked me, he said, what's this deal with this 1x20 stuff that Dr. Yessis talks about? And he's like, you know, everybody thinks this is nuts. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I said, but with the, you know, athletes, when we bring them in, especially the younger ones and even older ones in the first stages, I said, we use it and it's worked really well. I mean, I've gotten good results and all I know are results. I don't.
Right.
You could tell me I'm crazy on the science and you're probably right, but all I know is what I measured. And so he's got a guy that was on injured list because he had a cardiac condition, so he couldn't train with the team for a year. So Shea got him all by himself, right? Guy was 260, I think, at the time, 260 something. He was a bigger guy, and he was, you know, had this heart condition. So they started with a 1x20, just one set of 20 to failure, and just to kind of get him moving. Well, in that time, this was like, I forget, it was like 12 weeks maybe. I can't remember now. Somewhere in that ballpark. The guy gained like 30 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And his mile time went from 13 minutes to 8 minutes. Nice. And now, here's the interesting thing. And now, I forget how much his strength went up. It was a lot. But what was interesting was this. Now I asked them when I went over there, when we were there, I asked the guys, I said, how's that guy doing? He said, well, he said on the bench press, he said he's the strongest guy now by 60 pounds.
Oh, wow.
He benched four something? I can't remember. Now. It was a little over 400. 4 something, whatever it was. But he said he's stronger than everybody. He said, and you ought to watch him perform. He said it's like nothing you've seen. But what we've always said is give him, you know, you don't know whether or not you're giving him too much until you've given him too little.
Right.
You know, and to see what moves the needle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once the needle starts moving, what do you do? Why giving him more for what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Another one of my mistakes.
Well, all of us have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, how much can this guy handle? How much can this guy handle? When
that's not the question.
Yeah, we need to look at the other end. Because how much, all right, let's look at a portion of a week, okay? Yeah. So NCAA limits the amount of time you can spend at strength conditioning to 8 hours a week. Yeah. There's other 160 hours in the week. So if we're saying that we want to take all of that gas for that 168 hours and we're going to do it in 8,
yeah.
Well, you know what? There's relationships, there's sport, there's you know, academics, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into play too. So we really need to look more. And in Minnesota, Donnie Mae was talking about that, and it was something I've been looking at for a while. And I'll tell you what, I'm the biggest probably. I've learned so much in the course of my career from what I've messed up.
Join the club.
Failure is the best teacher that there is.
Yes, it is.
And, you know, I've overtrained the crap out of people, and I'm really, you know, that's one of the things in the past couple of years that I've done is step back. And, you know, yes, this is 1x20 is one of the things that's made me, you know, I haven't done it yet, and I haven't read the book. I've read a couple of articles about it. It's made me step back and like, you know what, if Dr. Yessis is saying one set of 20 is enough, maybe I have to think and see, well, I might be just overtraining him and not getting a much more of effect than I am from doing a fifth of the volume or a third of the volume or what it happens to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, we had a guy up at Michigan Tech. I help oversee all of the stuff up at Michigan Tech, and he had one lineman. And this is just from the strength point of view because what was interesting, and Jeff, you know, has had this experience too when I helped him when he was in New York. It was funny because he said, well, okay, what should I do? I said, okay, well, here's what I would do. And then he didn't tell me at the time, but he had a fourth of the guys do something else that was geared more towards strength development. And then what I gave him to do, and he's like, what was it, about the 2 or 3 month mark, Jeff? He realized it wasn't.
Okay.
And the strength developed, but the actual numbers just for the strength, which was what their objective was, Was
Man.
And that's not a knock on the 531 either, because it's geared towards strength, and that's what the objective is, and he's getting it done. But to apply it, then to take it over to an athlete, it's not as, you know what I mean? It's not as.
What's the transfer?
Yeah, what's the transfer onto the thing? And and even at Tech, he had one kid pushing a 700-pound squat this year, raw lineman, based on what we were giving him with that lower volume. We've never used more than 2 sets of anything with them ever. And they all get, the strength. He had more 500-some-pound squatters than Minnesota did when he went over there and talked to those guys.
Oh, wow.
He said they had more. His guys were stronger. And it's a D2 school, and it's a technical school, so you're not getting the freaks of nature,
right?
Up there. So anyway, we found that to be the case from a practical point of view. And the biggest discussion that I have now with Jeff and other guys that I help is like, look, I've already made all the mistakes probably that you can make. I didn't listen. I got one of the best teachers on planet Earth, right? Who is talking directly to me. Now, I'm not reading his book. He's telling me what to do. Right. Yeah. And I'm not listening.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, okay, he said it was this. I bet if I did double that, it'd be even better.
Yeah.
And then and then obviously you don't need to know the end of the story, and then finally I eventually got smarter, not smart maybe, but smarter, and started listening. And now, I go through the same thing with these other guys. It's the volume of work. It's got to be reasonable. It's got to be matched to what the guy needs to get the best result. That's all that matters. And like I tell him, we use we always say, look, if it didn't translate into a check, a medal or a scholarship, what you did was pointless.
Right.
Doesn't matter what the numbers say. I don't care. One of the other things I wanted to ask you quickly was, when you guys are using the percentages that you're using, do you typically see the weight that you're using? Like if you're trying to move, let's say, meter per second, are you seeing the weight stay right in a fairly static point for a while? Like let's say it's a 200-pound bench press, okay, and it's, you know what I mean? Do you see it stay in that? From what I've understood, and I've talked to other guys, they say it's like a 4 to 6 week time frame, and then they might change the resistance if they stay with that same one. What do you guys see?
Well, what we actually see a lot of is actually that the weights are completely different each week, with the even keeping the same velocity.
Okay.
Right? So there's going back to the Gonzalez-Badillo study, there's a very, very high relationship between percentage of 1RM and corresponding velocity. So much so that whenever they did test and retest with like a couple hundred people, that the greatest difference was 0.012 from the percentage and the velocity. Okay, and that was at like 60 or 80%. I can't remember which one, but it was only at 1% was at 0.012. All the rest is 0.000 something,
wow.
0.009 or 0.007. So there was none that was greater than actual 0.01. Now, so something that we have actually seen is we might, and because we're dealing with athletes, and a lot of the times that we're using the velocity is actually in season. So whenever we are doing this, we might have, let's say we've got 1 meter per second for 3 weeks in a row. Well, 1 week it might be 200 pounds. 1 week it might be 160. 1 week it might be 240. And it's all got to do with the additional stressors that they've got going on. How many reps were they getting at practice? What was their academic?
Yeah, right.
What was this? What was that? What was the other? It all plays into it.
Right.
Otherwise, and I think one of the things you're talking about was 3 or 4 weeks and changing. Yeah, we'll change something every 3 to 4 weeks. That 3-week wave that Lou always talked about, I think that I really see that holding true.
Yeah.
And we'll change from straight weight to chains or bands, or change the bar or something. And we'll go from the chest to board as we are going on throughout the course of the season, and then we'll drop the tendos off, or any of the velocity measuring devices off, because the filter. It's not long enough to usually register, so there's no point in doing it then. But we're going from a regular squat to a box squat, changing up the stimulus every 3 to 4 weeks. And it goes back to some, I have not been able to read all of Dr. Bondarchuk's stuff. Bondarchuk. Did I say it right that time?
Yeah, Bondarchuk. Yeah, I didn't know either, but I do now.
Yeah. So me too. But yeah, it kind of goes back to what he had found was that from the little that I've been able to read of him, but I've talked to Christian who gets his stuff from Dylan, that you just keep doing the same thing until it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And then we'll change it up.
Yeah.
Why reinvent the wheel if that's what he's found and that's really close to what Lewis found, and it seems like looking at some of his stuff, you're looking at 3 to 5 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, some of the changes. Let's look for the common denominator there and let's roll with that.
That's what I know. I've talked to Martin a lot, one of his other throwers, and obviously talked to Anatoly as well. And they kind of stay, they use a lot of cycles that are somewhere around 4 weeks, give or take. Yeah. And they'll Anatoly likes to rotate the movement a lot, so he'll say, well, hey, we're going to do a snatch. We'll do it with a much different grip, or, whatever the case may be.
Or off of blocks.
Off of blocks. There'll be all these variables in there. And even with your squat and bench press too, he likes to shake up the movement more so than the percentages. It's not as much of a fluctuation there, more on the movement side. Because he said, like he told me, he says, all the time change. He says, got to constantly be moving. So what you're saying kind of coincides with, what he would be recommending. Do you guys also use any jumps or plyos during this version, or not version, but this time?
We'll not necessarily. I'm trying to think of what they're doing with football right now, because I'm not with football any longer with my academic position. Your TA is limited to 5 people. What they do now is I think they might do either some box or some tag jumps with the speed stuff. Or I do know that they'll do full plyometric workouts out on the field, which would be separated out time-wise from the cleans or the squats and things like that. I can't really comment on exactly what they're doing now. I can tell you, what we did do was, we would do box squats, and then we would do some sort of box jump or depth jumps, and we'll alternate through those, just trying to get that highest explosive result that we could, kind of going back to the high-low-ish type stuff from Charlie.
Yeah. Well, I've learned a decent amount. I know Jeff has too. I really appreciate you taking the time. Would you, if we say pretty please, would you come back again when you have time and do this again? Because I've got a lot more questions in my head. I mean, it's some of the stuff you've said and answers have spurred more questions. But obviously, we don't have forever, and you got things to do. But I really appreciate the knowledge, because I mean, really, and like I said, I don't say this. Jeff knows I don't say this a lot, but I mean, I really do appreciate the focus that you have on just doing what is best for the performance on the field, as opposed to record numbers or looking at all these rabbit trails, in my opinion, instead of on the thing that matters. I really appreciate that, and it's unusual in the industry today, from what I've experienced. Like I said, I don't know everybody, but from what I've experienced, we've gotten off on a lot of different things. But I really appreciate the fact that you're staying focused on what's good for the athlete, and then going back and improving it from the academic end, which is over my head. But I just take your word for it. Sounds good to me.
Too, man. I got people that make me look good. So
right. He makes me look good. Because at least this thing gets recorded and done right. Because otherwise we're screwed. So, but anyway, we do appreciate it. Thanks, for joining us, and we'll do it again real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, you go ahead.